911.
Yes, I have an emergency.
Okay.
I think I have somebody dead.
The most grisly, nightmarish scene you could imagine.
Who is it?
The Dermans. I just came to check on them. They've been missing for about 4 days.
Two people that had no known enemies. It just didn't make any sense.
Oh, my God.
They're both dead?
Did you find both of them?
No.
No, it's just one. I don't know where the other one is.
Somewhere, somebody knows what happened.
Have you heard?
88-year-old Russell Dermond was found murdered in the garage of his home. His 87-year-old wife, Shirley, is nowhere to be found.
Mr. Dermond's head was decapitated. We do not know the whereabouts of his head.
Just 80 miles east of Atlanta, Georgia, sits Lake Oconee, home to 88-year-old Russell Dermond and his wife, 87-year-old Shirley Dermond, proud parents of 3 and grandparents to 9.
Lake Oconee is a very popular recreation destination in and of itself. But the homes there, particularly like in Great Waters where this took place, these are quiet homes. They're very expensive homes. They're multi-million-dollar homes.
Some of the finest golf courses in the southeast are in Reynolds. Very upscale, private community. I'm Howard Sills. I'm the sheriff of Putnam County. As you can see, it's a picturesque, idyllic neighborhood. Before this, we virtually had no crime. None. That's it. Right
That's
there.
the garage.
That's the garage. Mr. Dermond's body was found inside there, and as you can see, there's nothing else around it.
I'm Brad Dermond. My parents were Russell and Shirley Dermond. They met in college, love at first sight, didn't date anybody else once the two of them had met.
Russell was a World War II veteran. Shirley was a stay-at-home mother and homemaker.
Worked corporate life. Later in his career, in his 50s, he made a very big change in his path and decided to become a franchisee of Hardee's in Atlanta.
He sold a couple of those, retired, built this house, moved down here. They'd been retired here for well over a decade.
They were married for 68 years, a very solid marriage, and it also gave a very solid base for their children. And as demonstrated by the marriages that their kids have had as well.
They had a number of grandchildren, the all-American grandma and grandpa.
There was a neighborhood party for the Kentucky Derby. It was Saturday night. The Dermonds were supposed to be there, but they didn't show up.
Their friends who were expecting them there, they noticed that they weren't there. They just assumed, well, maybe they changed their mind or something came up. A few more days went by and nobody had heard from them.
3 days after that, a few neighbors decided to go check out their home to see if they were okay. The door was unlocked. They walked in. One of the neighbors went into the garage.
Made this horrifying, grim discovery.
Oh.
Putnam County 911.
Yes, I have an emergency.
Okay.
I think I have somebody dead.
Who is it?
The Dermonds. I just came to check on them. They've been missing for about 4 days.
Are they in the house?
Yes, yes.
They don't find Mrs. Dermond, but in the garage, they discover Russell Dermond's body. He had been decapitated.
You had a pool of blood around his neck area.
Oh, my God. Oh.
They're both dead?
Did you find both of them?
No.
No, it's just one. I don't know where the other one is.
I actually was the second car on the scene. We rapidly cleared the house first looking for someone, and then it was pretty obvious that no one had been there for some time. In 30 minutes, I was asking the FBI what anybody knew about these people. Not because of the home, not because they were wealthy, but because of the decapitation. That was so unusual.
They find Russell Derman's body kind of lodged in between their two cars. They were able to identify his body through fingerprints. They didn't know for sure it was him.
I had to get his fingerprints from the U.S. Navy from World War II. Obviously, the first thing I looked for was the head. I thought it would be somewhere in the proximity of the body in the garage, and it wasn't. That certainly was unusual, something I'd never personally seen in a homicide case before.
There was some towels that the killer had apparently used to roll up and place around the exposed neck here so that the blood would not drain out underneath the garage door. Because the idea was to keep a passerby, if someone were to pull in the driveway, I guess they didn't want them to see blood coming out from underneath the garage door.
The body had been there for some time, but it was an air-conditioned garage. It wasn't decomposed like it would have been in a non-climate controlled area.
They could not find Shirley Dermond. There was some thought maybe she was involved.
Mrs. Derman's purse was there, money was there, car was there, everything except Mrs. Derman was there. Although you don't suspect the 87-year-old of that type of crime, you can't eliminate that. Within 10 hours probably, I had Mrs. Derman's picture on every electronic billboard in the state of Georgia.
My brother-in-law called me. He couldn't communicate. So he put his son on the phone, and he did his best job.
They pretty quickly figured out that she was most likely kidnapped. They didn't know if she was alive or dead. They had little to work with because the house was pristine when they get in.
It looks entirely normal. It looks barely lived in. There's really nothing out of place. There's nothing that suggests that there was any kind of big struggle.
There would have been no signs of any kind of violence or any kind of break-in.
Within a couple of days, all of their children came. We had to have them go through to tell us, look, what's out of place here? What's missing?
Other than a lamp that was taken from inside the house and placed in the garage for lighting, the house was totally intact. Cash, Rolex watches, laptops, nothing was taken.
That doesn't look like any burglary or robbery I've ever seen.
It almost looked like it was staged by a real estate agent. Bed was not made up. There was some evidence that they had sat at some point in time at the kitchen table. But other than that, nothing in that home was out of place at all.
What was the motive here? Why these two people? Why this elderly couple who were retired, who had no known enemies, grandparents? They were as normal as you can get.
There's no thread of anything that makes any sense with any of this.
People loved having them around, but they were not individuals who sought a lot of attention to themselves. With the exception of the house that they owned, you would rarely know that they had much money. They were not ones to flaunt money around or pretentious in any form or fashion.
The totality of these circumstances are very unusual. If it's an abduction, you would expect some sort of extortion demand. If it was assassination, you would think both of the people would be there.
Law enforcement did what they always do. They try to recreate as much as they can a person's last days, things leading up to a homicide. In this particular case, they knew that Russell had gone grocery shopping.
That's him at his most happy moment. He'd go into Publix, getting himself out of the house, so that was totally business as usual for him.
Bought a loaf of bread and some cucumbers. Absolutely nothing of note at all. Window of when this occurred was sometime Friday morning until the time of the Kentucky Derby party. We know the Derby starts at 6:24, and obviously the party started before then, on Saturday. We know that the weekend edition of the USA Today had been delivered and was in the house. Now that's actually delivered on Friday, not Saturday.
Shirley had gotten the newspaper that day. She did crossword puzzles all the time.
There was communication between them and one of their children on Friday morning. He opened an email on his computer, so that's our window.
The very next day, we were interviewed by obviously Sheriff Sills and the FBI. Then we were taken to the house. I alone went into the garage. It would have been just the crime scene with my dad's body removed. That's it.
The autopsy determined that Russell Derman was not killed by the decapitation, that he was most likely killed before that.
We know that because there's a lack of arterial spurt. Here are the jugular veins and the arteries in your neck. If you sever one of those with the heart still pumping, then you're going to have arterial spurt, you're going to have blood being pumped out all over the room.
This was just in a pool, like it was just like water draining out of a bathtub. The blood was draining out of his body.
They don't know exactly what the cause of death was, but something had to happen in the cranial area that caused him to become deceased. Because there's no ligature marks like he's strangled.
Other than a laceration to one of Mr. Derman's index fingers, there was no trauma to his body at all.
The cut itself was right at the neckline. It didn't look like it was ragged. It was pretty clean. It was obvious that this was done with something that was a very sharp object. It may have been done by somebody with some experience. It certainly did not look like an amateur job.
Was it to send a message? Was it a shock value? Was it to conceal evidence? All those things were bandied about.
Murder weapon has not been found.
Has not been.
If you start talking about a professional, possibly, that performed this decapitation, you use a machete. This is going to happen in one motion. The decapitation occurs instantaneously. In my opinion, this would be the tool that was used.
The investigation's moving slowly. There's really not many leads. They're still looking for Shirley Derman, and then 10 days later, they find something that shocks everyone.
Let's face it, any story that has beheading and kidnapping in the same headline really doesn't need a whole lot more to be both frightening and fascinating to a lot of people. But this story actually does have another level of intrigue. It's where it took place, here at Great Waters. And if you look down the road, you'll see that it's a gated community. In other words, not everybody gets in. That includes us. And it has its own private security force. But the neighborhood does have a back entrance. A really big one. And here it is, all 1,900 plus acres of it. They call it Lake Oconee.
This was so out of character for anywhere really, but certainly for Lake Oconee.
People scared?
Yes.
There was a wide search for Shirley. There were billboards put up. They searched the lake. They had everything, and they were turning up nothing.
Yes, ma'am. We just come out, left our house to go fishing near Long Shoals boat ramp, and we went down towards the dam, Rock Island, and that way. We can't get close enough to it, and I don't want to get close enough to it, but it appears like a body floating in the water against a tree over here.
It became apparent as we pulled closer that it wasn't just, something floating in the water. It was a person.
We didn't know our mother's whereabouts. There was a sliver of hope that she was still alive.
We were there when the Putnam County Sheriff came off of Lake Oconee moments after physically pulling a body out of the water that he believes is 87-year-old Shirley Derman.
I'm going to tell you a little bit at the office, okay? If you want the stench of death, I'll rub it on you. This is the approximate area. Past that buoy there is where we've located Mrs. Derman's body. It had come up and floated and caught on the top of one of the submerged trees. As quick as I arrived on my scene, myself and the FBI agent pulled the body from the water.
The decomposition was extreme. They could tell that she had all of her clothes on, even her shoes. This was a woman who was ready for her day.
Being submerged in the river is a huge thing for criminals. DNA could be washed off. Any kind of important evidence could have been hindered during that time.
What makes the difference is that how someone can take a life and just throw it away.
Shirley's body was to be concealed forever, whoever did it. Tied to her ankles was a mesh bag with 2 cement blocks in it.
They were thinking that 60 pounds would be enough to anchor her to the lake floor. But if you're a killer, you would know it takes a substantial amount of force to keep someone down.
One of the things that's really fascinating about this case is the contradictions. Russell Derman's murderer was more careful. They were careful to keep the blood from seeping out underneath the garage, but they wanted him to be found. They left him there. Mrs. Derman, it seemed a lot more rushed. They went to great risk taking her body out to the lake 5 miles away. There's lots of opportunities where they could have been caught. Were they amateurs? Were they professionals? Well, there's evidence of both.
I believe there's more than one individual involved in this crime, certainly, maybe even more than 2.
It was just too much work. Taking her body from the house down to the boat, even though she was an elderly woman, it still would have been a lot of effort that one person couldn't have done. We discovered with the autopsy of Shirley Derman that her body had been bludgeoned badly.
Massive trauma to the back of her head. Probably the worst open skull fracture I've ever seen.
That's a violent death. What happened to her? She was dead when her body hit the water.
The sheriff has said it could be a hammer. He said it could have been from a piece of wood.
I can definitely say the wounds on the head are consistent with coming from a hammer. According to the autopsy, there were circular and semicircular wounds on the head. It's just how the hammer hit. It just got this part or it got the whole head. If it has a distinct marking on it, I could look at her head and say, I know that this hammer was the one that was used.
One of the things we don't really know for sure is where Shirley Derman was killed. Was it inside the house? Probably not, because there's no signs of it.
I don't think they were murdered at that house. I think they were taken somewhere. Mrs. Derman had 2 and possibly a 3rd impacts with a blunt object that penetrated the skull. There should have been cast off blood from that. That was not present in that garage.
It's going to be violent and it's dirty. I set up a demonstration where we use a modified rat trap. We place blood on the rat trap. I let the trap go. There's going to be spatter in all directions, and there's no way that you could account for that. You don't know where that spatter's going to go because you're striking a blood source.
For whatever reason, these people were singled out. They're on a cul-de-sac in a gated, multi-million-dollar resort community that we have no crime in.
There's not a lot of people that live there full time. These are just lake houses and weekend getaway houses for so many people.
We don't know whether they came by land or they came by water. They could have come by boat.
So it wouldn't be hard to do what we just did, get a boat, 5 minutes on the water. Here you are. The sheriff's boat and the crime tape is the giveaway. This is where it happened. And a boat on the water, even at night here, wouldn't be unusual. Now, we're not saying whoever carried out this crime actually came by water, but to a lot of people here, it makes sense.
Potentially they came by car, left by car, came back by boat, left by boat multiple times.
We know Mrs. Derman's body was disposed of by boat simply because where it came up, it couldn't have been disposed of in any other manner. That's a good 5 to 6 miles from here.
Typically, if you entered by the road, there would be a security gate that you would have to pass through that would record your picture and all that.
So this is the guard shack.
These bars weren't here then.
Hello.
Hey, I'm Sheriff Sills.
Okay.
Thank you.
Was security like that 5, 6 years ago?
It was more lax then. If you had a sticker, Reynolds decal, they waved you through. If you said you were going to the clubhouse for lunch, they pretty much waved you through. Every contractor on earth, every electrician, plumber had a decal.
There was apparently a video security system at that checkpoint, but it had not been working. Apparently, the storms had knocked it offline, and there was no way to go back and see who may have been coming and going through that gate.
You have to wonder, were they that lucky to just happen to come upon the house when their security footage was not available?
I don't think the perpetrators knew that the camera wasn't working. Then again, it could have been somebody inside the community.
It's not an easy place to find. You have to know where you're going. Hard to imagine somebody's going to stumble upon the Derman's house.
What about security cameras? Was there any?
Well, no, we pulled every one there was.
Is this a camera surveilled community? Even
No.
Doorbell cameras?
No. There was no such thing as a doorbell camera then. We found several docks and things like that did have them.
Yeah.
But the cameras were pointed at the boats, you know what I'm saying? Didn't pick up anything out. Every place that did have a camera, we asked about it, and none of it helped us at all.
The Dermans at their own residence, they also had a security alarm, but it was never activated when this could have happened.
They pretty much established early on that they probably knew this person. They always kept their doors locked, but there was no sign of a forced entry. The door was most likely opened for whoever this was, and that would indicate that they knew who it was.
Anytime you've got an unsolved murder, people sometimes want to assume it's a family member.
We were all, suspects.
Everybody's the suspect except me.
Oconee 911.
I think I have somebody dead.
The neighbors just were floored. They've got a headless body.
I don't know where the other one is.
10 days later, the deceased body of Mrs. Derman floats up.
It appears like a body floating in the water against a tree over here.
It's not the type of neighborhood for random crime. And it damn sure isn't the circumstances of a decapitated man and an 88-year-old man in his home being a random crime.
Was it one of our neighbors who might be this horrific double murderer? Or was this just somebody passing through?
To have the head taken from the scene is even more of a crazy thing.
There was nothing to indicate any kind of robbery. There were things of value there.
There was jewelry. There was Rolex watches.
Nothing was taken. A gated community, no crime, wealthy people. I think that money probably had something to do with it.
The last day that anyone saw him that we know of, he'd made a transfer at the bank to pay for nursing home insurance. Annual premium was due.
They were looking at everybody. It was such a wide net because they had no real idea what had happened. All they knew was this was probably personal, because why else would they kill them that way? That requires a certain level of just depravity that's rare.
We were all suspects.
Let me tell you, the only person that's not a suspect, Sheriff Sills, because I know where I was.
The Dermans have 3 adult children. Right away, they're going to be the first people you look at because the personal nature of the killings.
We've got their cell phone records. We know where they were on the day, and I polygraphed all 3 of them.
Whoever did this, they didn't want Shirley Derman to be found. That points away from the kids having any involvement if they're trying to get some inheritance money or anything like that, because as long as she was missing, their assets would be frozen.
Wouldn't their motive have been, if it was going to be one of them, to do it before they were in their late 80s when they had not been living off of their retirement?
They passed polygraphs not only about did they do it, but did they know something that they weren't telling us.
There was nothing there to link them to the murders, and there was a lot of thought that maybe someone was sending a message to one of the kids through their parents. Hey, this is what's going to happen to you.
Nobody knew if this was isolated to just mom and dad or this was some sort of issue with the entire family.
14 years before Russell and Shirley were murdered, their son was murdered in Atlanta during a drug deal gone bad.
Our oldest brother, Mark, he had a really severe drug and alcohol problem from his teenage years all the way through his adulthood.
He had been murdered while trying to purchase drugs. Police made an arrest in that case and conviction. So there was some thought maybe this is a revenge. But the guy was locked away. Their son was not a dealer. He was just a user. It was not any kind of high-profile figure in the drug trade.
There's no nexus that we could ever determine between that and the Dermond's murder at all.
They had lived there on this lake quietly for a long time. If this were revenge, it was extremely delayed revenge. So the revenge theory just made no sense.
They didn't seem to have any enemies. There didn't seem to be an old business partner from 20 years ago or someone that was fired who said, I'm going to get you for this.
If you had to name any couple within the community, Russ and Shirley Dermond would definitely be the least likely to be a target of someone.
One of the more popular theories is that maybe the mob was involved.
When you hear about a decapitation murder, well, your mind goes, oh my God, it was a mob hit. This is something that only the mafia would do.
What do you think about this idea of a mafia was involved?
There's nothing to talk about.
It's remarkable how many people think, because these people are from New Jersey, they're in the mafia. There's nothing.
The sheriff had the FBI come in. They did a profile. They said the killer likely liked to hunt, use knives.
Well, guess what? That's 95% of the people in Georgia. Okay. Did we interview everybody in Great Waters or everybody that owns a home or property there? No, we didn't. But I think we interviewed like 250 people in one day. We did phone tower, dumps, polygraph, the yard man, the handyman.
There was one case that popped up that there were a lot of similarities.
She was found in the laundry room, which is just inside the garage.
No sign of forced entry in her home. Wealthy. Wait a minute. Maybe this is something.
Murder mystery in Georgia. An 88-year-old man's mutilated body found in his home in a posh lakeside resort.
Rattling the nerves of a small country club community.
A local sheriff says he is working with police departments in other states to help solve the murders of an elderly couple.
This is such a troubling case, such a gruesome crime.
It was all over the local news, the national news, that a headless body was found right here on Lake Oconee. 10 days later, Shirley, her body surfaces, and it's miles and miles away. It's been tied down with blocks.
While police admit this is a true whodunit for them, they don't think it was random.
No evidence of any forced entry or struggle or things like that.
There was one case that popped up that there were a lot of similarities. A socialite in New York in her 80s.
Lois Colley, wife of Eugene Colley, who became fabulously wealthy, building an empire of McDonald's restaurant franchises.
She was found in the laundry room, which is just inside the garage, and she was lying on the floor.
There was no sign of forced entry.
Cause of death is blunt force trauma. We don't have any suspects.
They had 200 McDonald's franchises. It was a huge estate.
The Dermonds had some Hardee's chains down here. No sign of forced entry. Wealthy. Wait a minute. Maybe this is something.
Maybe there's some connection.
There's a pattern. There's similarities. But it was a coincidence. They found the killer up there. It was nobody with any ties to Georgia or not been in Georgia. Could not have been involved in the Dermonds killings.
The lady had been beaten to death with a fire extinguisher, and they made an arrest.
Russell Dermond was dead when he was decapitated. It's not indicative that a blunt force object was used to kill Mr. Dermond, because I would have expected to see some kind of spatter.
He had some gunshot residue on his shirt, so we're assuming he was shot.
The thought was that there was a bullet that had been lodged inside his head, and that's why he was decapitated, because that would be evidence. There was no shell casings found. Just the residue on the collar was all the evidence that there might have been a gunshot fired.
We didn't see any evidence of a bullet hole in a wall or anything like that. That's one of the things that's so mysterious about this case, is that we can infer that that is a very plausible, if not likely, scenario for how Mr. Dermond died. But without more information, that can't be proven.
If we ever had access to Mr. Dermond's head and he was in fact shot in the head, we could recover the bullet, a piece of the bullet. No two guns are alike. No two guns could ever be alike. They're like the fingerprints on your hand. So if we had the bullet, we could determine the manufacturer of the weapon that fired the bullet. We could track it back to an individual gun and then the owner, and that would give us at least a lead. If I were going to shoot someone in the head and I would not want the bullet to penetrate their skull, I would use a .22. This is a lead bullet. That's the key. 9mm, 380s, 357s, all of these are metal jacketed bullets. They have a copper jacket. So as it goes through, it's not going to break up the way that a lead bullet, so when it gets hot, this gets soft. It's lead. So as it goes in the skull, it's going to fragment into pieces. It doesn't normally penetrate all the way through the skull because it's a lead bullet. I performed a demonstration where I shot into a series of wooden blocks because I wanted to show how many layers that a .22 would penetrate. In this case, it looks like it's penetrated to the 5th layer. A 9mm would go through 8 boards. A 45 would go through 7 boards. I've got a 357 Magnum that would go through 15 boards. So you see a .22 only penetrated 5 boards. That's very minimal.
My hunch is that Russell's body was never intended to be left there. They intended to remove him from the residence as well, but for whatever reason they couldn't. So maybe the next best thing from the killer's perspective was to remove the head and the evidence that is probably contained in or on that head. I think the killers were not professionals, but they were intelligent. They knew enough to cover their tracks enough to really make this very difficult for investigators.
Do you have any insight on who was killed first?
We have some evidence that indicates that it might have been at the same time.
Based on evidence, it looked like some of Mom's hair was collected from our dad's hand, so it looks like maybe, perhaps they were together. He tried to protect her.
I think there was some acquaintance with him because, again, Mr. Dorman, he was 88 years old, but he was kind of a tough old bird from what I understood, and I can't see him going easy. There's no evidence of anything being disturbed, no evidence of any struggle.
In all likelihood, somebody did see at least one of the killers that day.
We actually had a witness through the woods that saw someone.
This is not where something like this occurs.
Well, a beheading is not where it occurs anywhere. We actually had a witness through the woods that saw someone in the Derman's yard that Saturday.
The day of the Kentucky Derby party, earlier that day, a neighbor did remember seeing someone in the Derman's yard.
This was a number of yards away. It was kind of off in the distance. The sheriff believes, and I think he's right, that's probably the killer, or one of them.
It fits within the timeline when they think the murders happened. They could have been there for an extended period of time. They could have been there most likely several hours.
Witness couldn't describe the race or the age or the build of the individual.
Almost like a ghostly figure that just adds to the eeriness of this case.
She assumed it was a man because of the stride he was taking.
Unfortunately, the witness didn't get a good enough look to provide a whole lot of useful details. We all wish that eyewitness had gotten a better look. A lot of people wonder if is there a serial killer on the loose, or was this some type of a cult killing? Maybe, but there's not been any other murders around there, so it's not a serial killer.
We can't find anything similar before it or anything similar after it.
It's an isolated event, so by definition, it's not a serial killer.
Then you start getting into the realm of some sort of Charles Manson type religious cult deal.
Maybe, but if there is, there's none that anybody's aware of, and Howard Sills knows his community pretty well. There's just no evidence to support any of those speculative theories.
Is this just a thrill kill? Is this just somebody out there just to scare people who just did it for the thought they could get away with it? Nothing makes sense. There's nothing that would lead you to think that this is how these people's lives would end. No financial irregularities. The kids didn't have any connections with unsavory characters.
Howard Sills has been doing this a very, very long time, and he's got a nearly perfect record of solving homicides. This file is not sitting on a shelf gathering dust. It's not. You can go to his office today and you'll see it right there front and center. Boxes and boxes of stuff.
At this juncture, we don't know of any DNA evidence other than DNA from Russell and Shirley. They were all matter of fingerprints, but none that were identifiable.
They used luminol. They looked for prints. They dusted everything. It was very thoroughly processed.
With forensic assistance, there had been some evidence of trying to clean up something there between the cars. There were many peculiarities about the scene that simply didn't make sense and still don't make sense today.
We had access to things in this case that you normally don't as a reporter. He showed us some evidence that he's got. It's evidence that could seal the deal.
This was one of the most horrifying murders we've seen in the North Georgia area, if not the entire United States, in a very long time.
When Russ and Shirley Dermond were killed, it was a major shock to this community that something that violent could occur to a couple that was pretty unassuming and no one would dislike.
This hasn't happened before. So I don't care if it's Buckhead, or Bangladesh. When you have a crime like this in the neighborhood, people are going to be upset.
We had access to things in this case that you normally don't as a reporter. He showed us some evidence that he's got. We can't just talk about it because it might compromise the investigation. It's not something that will point him to the killer or killers, but it was something that once the killers are identified or there's some leads that might point to somebody, it's evidence that could seal the deal.
Is the answer you're looking for in that evidence room?
There's something there that we can compare. I think they were targeted, and I always will. Somebody that wanted them dead and was mad at them. It was either some sort of extortion/robbery, some financial gain from their demise, someone that thought they had something of value. Either they didn't have it or they didn't give it up if they did. Or maybe they did and they killed them in the end.
This case has been by far the most baffling. Russell Dermond's head's not been found. The house has been sold. We've got new security up there.
I think what it's going to take is somebody giving us a call because somebody knows who did this. They need to tell because they're going to do this again. Anybody who'll do this will do anything. There are people that know about this.
But if it can happen to them in this place, it can happen to us. So we need this case solved. This was somebody's parents. These were a mother and a father, grandmother, grandfather. They need justice.
Just trying to keep it together, I'm sorry. My folks, particularly my dad, is in my dreams probably more than anybody. And then there have been times where it seems like he's giving me a lead on solving this. We get very close and then it just seems unturned. So.
When I tell you I think about this case every day, I'm not exaggerating. It's the only murder case in my career that I've not been able to solve, so it's a personal challenge, it's a personal embarrassment to some extent. But it's my responsibility. It's my duty to find out who did this. God willing, we're coming for you.
If you have any information about the Dermans murders, please call the Putnam County Sheriff's Office at 706-485-8557.
You can ask anybody in this community, do you know about the Morenci boys?
Everybody in Morenci knew Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner. Everybody. They vanished into thin air.
I mean, there's an Amber Alert out for my children. How does this happen? You know, I live in rural America. That doesn't happen. Where are my boys?
On the day after Thanksgiving in 2010, as most Americans are thinking about leftovers, football, and Black Friday shopping, there was disturbing news out of a small town of about 2,000 people on the Michigan-Ohio border.
Thanksgiving weekend here at the station, and I remember when initial Amber Alert came in.
My producer gets into my ear at about 10:40, and she says, the Morenci police chief just called, and he's got a couple of missing boys, and he wants to get their pictures on the air.
It was really critical for me in my mind to get that information out to try to get the boys home as soon as possible.
I think anytime you have an Amber Alert, it's obviously a big deal in a newsroom, but this was a holiday weekend. It was Black Friday.
They faxed us some photos into the newsroom. They came in really late, so we actually stayed on a couple extra minutes past 11 o'clock to make sure we got these on, letting people know that these kids were missing from Morenci.
3 brothers are missing. Andrew Skelton, 9, Alexander Skelton, 7, and Tanner Skelton, 5. Their parents are separated, and they are spending part of the holiday with their dad. They are last seen on Thanksgiving Day, playing in his backyard in a quiet neighborhood in Morenci, Michigan.
I think everyone's first question was, Morenci, where's Morenci?
Morenci is literally off the beaten path. It's a small town kind of situated just north of the Ohio border. It is like a one stoplight town where you can drive through it in about 10 seconds if you catch that light right.
Your typical small town America community. You don't hear about major crime. I couldn't even tell you the last time there was a homicide there. I remember thinking to myself that this just sounded like a mix-up.
Live to Michigan, Amber Alert. 3 young brothers, just 5, 7, and 9 years old. They're missing tonight. Michigan State Police and the FBI say the little boys are in extreme danger. Last seen on Thanksgiving.
Residents are asked to be on the lookout for a woman named Joanne Taylor, thought to be driving a silver or gray minivan. The boy's father, John Skelton, said the boys were with her.
John claims that Joanne took the kids the night of Thanksgiving and that they were safe and sound with her. She was bringing them home, but unfortunately he had to go to the hospital, so he wasn't quite sure where they were at right now, but he assured us they were safe and they were with her and her husband.
The 3 little boys, all under 10 years old, still in elementary school.
5, 7, and 9. And they were always together. The 3 of them, they were each other's best friends, and they did everything together. Andrew, he was this little old man stuck in a little boy's body. So grown up, wise beyond his years, wasn't a computer game that he couldn't master. And so caring. He would crawl on your lap, put his arm around you, and just do this little tap with his hand. Alexander. He's my little daredevil. 7 years old, he's already had stitches twice. Not afraid of anything. Dirt bikes, pedal bikes, four-wheelers. Just being outside. Loved being outside. Loved teaching his little brother all the fun things to do outside. And then there's Tanner, who was still a baby. I mean, 5 years old. Mommy's little boy. Loved to cuddle. Was just starting to read. Loved that. You know, finally he's able to do things that his brother did. Wanted to be like his big brothers. Followed them around.
The boys' parents, Tanya and John Skelton, had split a couple of months before the boys disappeared. Tanya had sole custody of the boys, but agreed to let Andrew, Alexander, and Tanner stay with their father for Thanksgiving.
Tanya and John are living in separate houses. John's in the family home, and Tanya is like a block and a half away. You can see from her yard back to that house.
John, he said that on Wednesday night, the night before Thanksgiving, the boys asked for fried chicken and birthday cake, and that he made them their favorite dinner, and they watched a karate movie.
She allowed him to have the boys, over Thanksgiving, and they were supposed to return the next day. That Friday after Thanksgiving, Tanya's like, all right, well, there's a football game I want to take the boys to. Where are you guys? Can I come get them?
I sent him a text message, and he's like, well, we're not home right now. And we went back and forth, I'm just going, that just wasn't making sense, but okay. Then he says, the boys are with my friends, and he says, I'm at the hospital. I fell off a ladder.
So Tanya and I believe her sister Tennille, they want to get in the house. Tanya, I know she had talked to the police there, and they said don't do anything.
Tanya says her divorce attorney also advised that she wait to take action until 3 p.m., the time she and the boys' father, John Skelton, had originally agreed he'd drop off the boys. 3 p.m. comes and goes, and Tanya decides to go to John Skelton's home.
I don't care if I get in trouble. I'm going over there. We couldn't get in the house. There was a board wedged to the door into the steps that go upstairs. And I'm like, okay, now I know something is not right.
Police arrive at the Skelton home. They kick down the door to get in and are shocked by what they find inside. Tanner, Alexander, and Andrew Skelton were last seen on Thanksgiving Day, playing in the backyard at their father's house. The next day, their dad, John Skelton, was supposed to return the boys to their mother, Tanya. That never happened.
I recall waking up the next morning and just assuming that they'd be found. All day Saturday, nothing. Getting into Sunday, nothing. Once we kind of got into Monday, it started to really hit me. These kids they could possibly be in trouble.
The search is on for a mystery woman named Joanne Taylor and her husband, Mark. People John Skelton said were friends of his and were taking care of the boys.
Joanne Taylor's name becomes like the biggest clue they have at first. So this is the lead.
We had a whole team of people involved in this investigation, doing lots of great work to help locate the boys. And there was one member that was assigned to locate Joanne Taylor.
Meanwhile, volunteers are rallying in Morenci to help try to find Andrew, Alex, and Tanner. The Morenci Fire Department is tasked with leading the volunteer searches. with direction from law enforcement. The fire hall becomes a command center. While the fire department is leading hundreds of volunteers in careful searches of the area, investigators continue to look for any trace of this Joanne Taylor.
They did a great deal of research and investigation based on the information that John Skelton gave us, where this person possibly lived, cars that potentially that person would be driving, all sorts of computer searches, interagency research, federal research, state research, records searches.
John Skelton is in a hospital about 40 miles away in Toledo, Ohio. Tanya says he told her that he had an accident while doing some work around the house. But she says she was later given different information by hospital staff.
The nurse needed to tell me that Mr. Skelton came in as an attempted suicide. My heart stopped. I'm like, excuse me? And the rope broke. He fell and had a broken ankle.
The officer responding to the Skelton home says he saw the evidence of the alleged suicide attempt.
The noose was kind of hanging in the entryway of the stairwell. As you go up the stairs, it kind of right angles a couple times and then to the top floor. The noose was tied around the banister at the top level, and then it was tied to a bedroom upstairs, to the doorknob of the bedroom.
He had attempted to hang himself. It was a very thin rope from a banister of a stairwell.
Officer Hillard went to the hospital to speak to John Skelton.
He had some ligature marks around his neck, and then he also had, I believe, an injury to one of his ankles. He was under a whole lot of mental stress. He would close his eyes and, make a noise like he was trying to force whatever was going on in his head out of his head.
Skelton would later deny he tried to take his own life, but wouldn't explain how he was injured. Also raising questions, a Facebook message that appeared on Dad John Skelton's page Wednesday night.
Tanya then saw him post something on Facebook, and she immediately called Chief Weeks and said, "I'm disturbed. John has posted this. He didn't bring the boys back. I'm worried that something's happened."
A desperate race against the clock to find 3 little boys who were feared to be in horrible danger, or worse. The brothers spent Thanksgiving with their dad, and now, tonight, they are missing.
Police are trying to figure out what was going on in John Skelton's home in the hours leading up to the boys' disappearance. There was a post made to his Facebook profile the day before Thanksgiving, referring to his estranged wife, Tanya.
He went on Facebook and said, "May God and Tanya forgive me."
When police responded to Mom Tanya's report that the boys didn't return after a visit, the condition of John Skelton's home alarmed them.
I've stood over a number of bodies on homicides and very tragic scenes, and when I look at this particular scene, it's eerie.
Things were pushed over, mirrors were broken, computers were broken, cords were cut off, all the electronics. It was just debris and mess throughout the entire house. Like someone had ransacked it, basically.
The marriage had been strained for months since another incident involving the boys in September of that year. Tanya says it started when John Skelton started talking about moving from Michigan to his home state in Florida.
John goes back to a high school reunion, and he runs into some old friends. He comes back from that reunion, and all of a sudden, he's very quick to say we should move the family to Florida.
Tanya was skeptical and needed to find out if she could leave Michigan because she has a criminal record.
I was going to make phone calls. We needed to see what I needed to do to be able to move.
John decides that he's going to just make things happen. So he picks the kids up early one day from school,
There was a message from the school wanting to know what was going on. John just signed the boys out. Said, you guys are going to Florida on a family vacation. And I went, what? I don't know anything about this.
Tanya didn't want John Skelton to leave the state with the boys, so she got the police involved and called a lawyer who drew up paperwork to attempt to stop Skelton.
I had to file for divorce, and I said, do whatever you have to do. I don't want him getting to Florida with these boys.
But before the paperwork could be served, Skelton got wind of Tanya hiring an attorney.
John is furious, storms out. John gets the two older boys in the car and peels out of the driveway.
He was able to get the oldest two boys, put them in the van. Almost ran over my dad and my sister as he was backing out of the driveway. The boys were not in seatbelts. They were still standing, crying, wanting out of the van.
Skelton made it to Florida with the two oldest boys. Tanya followed, and they went before a judge there, who ruled the boys should go back to Tanya. When they returned to Michigan, she had full custody, and as far as Tanya was concerned, the marriage was over.
I said, you've broken this huge bond, of this huge wall of trust by taking off. And of course his argument was, well, I told you I wanted to move. I said, you said you wanted. You didn't say you were going to. And you took my children.
Tanya says that on the advice of an attorney, she agreed to give John Skelton visits with their sons.
The Thanksgiving holiday, and he wanted to have them and have Thanksgiving dinner with his family that's here in Morenci. And I said, that's fine. I want them Black Friday and that Saturday. Unfortunately, didn't happen.
With the boys missing, their father hospitalized after an alleged suicide attempt, the family home destroyed, and massive searches underway, there is a glimmer of hope, a possible sighting of the boys.
The two older ones were really, they didn't act like they wanted to come through that door when they first came in. And they kind of huddled together.
Prayers for Andrew, Alex, and Tanner. The three Skelton brothers, police say, remain in grave danger the longer they go missing. No one has seen them since Thanksgiving, and everyone here is praying they are out there somewhere and safe. Today marked another day of dozens of volunteers searching this tiny town for any signs of the little boys. Working with few, if any, leads, neighbors here spending the day traipsing through wooded areas, even streams.
In the days after the boys were reported missing, volunteers combed the area around Morenci, Michigan, the boys' hometown. The focus of investigators is trained on the account given by the boys' father, who said he left the boys with a friend.
At this point, we have been able to eliminate the reported established relationship between Joanne Taylor and Mr. Skelton.
Investigators cannot locate anyone named Joanne Taylor, who is able to verify John Skelton's story. So they need to figure out what John Skelton was doing and where he was the night of Thanksgiving into the early morning hours of Friday.
We decided with the staff that we had and the numbers of volunteers that were
could bring them to live. I could bring my lover. And baby, you make me wait. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Welcome you back there again. Play the music back there again. I saw the walking out of the window. Wonder if I could bring them down. I could bring my love now, baby. You make.
Shorty, if you really wanna go, baby, then you gotta take me the mess. I tried to soak in all the years and take it all in, but I come up for a breath and cry. I gave my drama, gave my simple, gave my friends a helping hand. I bet you know that they are dead. I wish I could tell you this. The more we talk, the talk is not a tongue. The more we talk, the talk is not a tongue. I did not come this far for any stronger. All of a sudden there was nothing left. Well, last night a doctor thought you were lying. I never meant to keep you alive. There might be stuff we said that sound dumb to you, but to get a red wine and take it with a lemon.